Hello everyone, this is Jen and I make useful English Lit study videos on Shakespeare, poetry, fiction, literary devices and more to help you get top grades in the subject. So in today's video, we are going to be looking at another top grade sample essay walkthrough, and this time it's going to be on the novel The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde, which I'm sure a lot of you will be studying as either part of your Victorian literature or Gothic literature module. Or for those of you who are doing the GCSE, it'll be for your 19th century novel paper. So let's dive straight into it. So we're going to be looking at specifically the May 2019 19th century novel past paper taken from the AQA GCSE board, and the question is asking us to read the following extract taken from chapter 8 titled The Last Night of the novel, and then answering the question that follows. So in this extract, Paul, who is Dr. Jekyll's servant, talks to Utterson about recent events at Jekyll's mansion. So this is specifically the extract that you're given. So those of you who have your own copy, either you can look it up yourself and put it next to the video as we are going through the essay together, or you can maybe take a screenshot of this and then juxtapose it on the screen, however works for you. And so anyway, we're asked to, starting from this extract, explore how Stevenson presents Mr Hyde as an inhuman and disturbing member of society. Specifically, we're asked to write about how Stevenson presents Mr Hyde in this extract, and also how Stevenson presents Mr Hyde as an inhuman and disturbing member of society in the novel as a whole. Pretty standard approach to asking these questions, so nothing too surprising there. So our focus then is very much on characterization, right? And so how Stevenson, through either external or internal traits, right, whether it be appearances or behavior or perhaps emotions and feelings and thoughts, etc., how through all of these aspects the author presents Mr Hyde as an inhuman. Be careful though, it's inhuman as in perhaps animalistic and beast-like, right? As opposed to inhumane, which is slightly different, and disturbing member of society. So let's dive straight into it. Intro paragraph. So in this extract from chapter 8 of Jekyll and Hyde, Stevenson presents Hyde more so as an animalistic creature than a human being, and a character whose feral behavior and inhumane demeanor cause chaos, confusion, and distress to those around him. So right away, the student is telling the examiner that she's addressing the question directly and offering a strong, relevant thesis, right? Hitting those keywords right off the bat. In Paul and Utterson's exchange, the dramatic irony of Paul's ignorance about Jekyll's real identity as Hyde reinforces the inscrutability and extraordinary quality of Hyde's constitution. So dramatic irony here demonstrates awareness of a key literary and dramatic advice, which is super important for AO2. It's a literary device more so here, not dramatic because it's not a play. But Paul's ignorance about Jekyll's real identity as Hyde, just want you guys to note here, is that in this extract, at this point in the novel, Paul doesn't know that actually his master leads this secret double life as the abhorrent Edward Hyde, right? He doesn't know that about his master at all. And so hence the dramatic irony, because we as the reader, we know that, right? But the character here doesn't. So a key source of Hyde's disturbing effect on others is in his ineffable horror. He neither looks civilized enough to pass for humankind, nor is he so primal to be crawling on all fours like a real animal. So ineffable here is actually a key word because there's just something about Hyde throughout the novel that seems to be indescribable, right? It seems to be beyond the capacity of human language to describe. He's so ugly and so monstrous that it seems as if human language isn't able to quite capture the extent of his evil. So the use of the word ineffable here is obviously also demonstrating sophisticated vocabulary, right? So hitting the AO4. What is certain, however, is that Stevenson establishes Hyde as the story's central diabolical agent through a series of violent and immoral transgressions. So this phrase here sets up the reader for various examples and signposting as well the use of ample textual evidence, right? A series of transgressions that the student will go on to bring in the rest of her essay, right? Hitting that AO1, or at least promising that she's going to be fulfilling the AO1, okay? Which I will illustrate in the rest of this essay with details both from the extract and elsewhere in the novel. By the way, guys, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below, subscribe to my channel, and switch on that bell notification if you find this video helpful so far. This would really help me carry on making these useful English Lit study videos so that you can get top grades in the subject and we can inspire more people to enjoy the study of literature. In Paul's recollection of his master's shocking appearance and actions, there's heavy use of animal imagery. So right away, you've got the use of a major kind of literary device, imagery. Verbs such as slipped out, digging among the crates, gave a kind of cry and whipped upstairs, formed the impression of a hungry, voracious beast in search of prey. But we soon realize that this beast is a surreptitious and shady presence, and not a fierce and powerful animal as one would normally expect of an aggressive animal. So this is quite a subtle observation here, because normally when we think of beast, we think of a voracious animal, but the student here is able to pick up that this beast actually is not quite as ferocious and almost majestic, right, as we would think of, say, like a lion, but rather it's actually compared later in a simile to being like a rat, right? So this is reflected when Paul points out in a simile that he cried out like a rat and ran from me. Such primitive yet shifty behavior marks a sharp contrast from Jekyll's usual well-mannered and composed self, who would engage his servants in polite conversation instead of scuttling away in furtive secrecy. And the student is bringing in Jekyll here because obviously we know that actually Hyde is Jekyll and vice versa, right? And so we're comparing the sort of contrast between the respectable Jekyll versus the very much lowly, right, and abhorrent Hyde. So Hyde's complete avoidance of dialogue with Paul likewise adds to his animalistic characterization, right? Avoidance of dialogue, because once he sees Paul, he scuttles away, completely refraining from speaking. After all, what sets humans and beasts apart is the ability to communicate with words. So here the student is actually also adding on to her explanation of the simile, right? Adding on to her understanding of why Hyde is compared to a rat-like beast, right? Because obviously he is ashamed of his evil, right? So as Paul continues to recount what he saw, his refusal to accept that thing as my master reinforces the sense of Hyde as a non-human creature, a thing rather than a person. So the student is able to present a strong topic sentence, right? Present a strong topic sentence with a new idea, all the while sticking close to answering the question, which is, how is Hyde inhuman, right? Further, Paul's marked distress shows that Hyde's physical formality is so grotesque, it affects others on a deep emotional level. So the student explains to the disturbing effect of Hyde after having explained how he is inhuman. So showing an awareness of addressing the entire question, right? Because don't forget, the question is asking us to explain how the author describes Hyde as both an inhuman and disturbing member of society. So as evidenced by the servants turning to a sort of mottled pallor, right? Gone all pale. It is also reflected in the wild, erratic fluctuations of Paul's tone, okay, so bringing in a new literary device here, towards Utterson. At first, he attempts to maintain logical composure with the resolute statement of, "Sir, that thing was not my master, and there's the truth." But this facade soon crumbles as he gives way to shrill frustration, dramatized by the despairing apostrophe and rhetorical questions in his repouse to Utterson's protestations. "Oh, sir, do you think I do not know my master after 20 years? Do you think I do not know where his head comes to in the cabinet door?" So apostrophe refers to the O address, right? And rhetorical questions obviously is like, "Do you think I don't know?" Right? So again, students showing strong engagement with stylistic techniques with appropriate subject terminology, hitting the AO2. By the way, speaking of tone, which is a super important literary device / technique / observation, but Anyway, a literary attribute, super important for any GCSE or actually literary student to understand. So I have a video explaining just exactly what tone is and how you can go about explaining it in your literary analysis essays. So please do check it out here if you haven't already seen it, okay? So while Utterson acknowledges Paul's bewildered anguish, he offers a more empathetic interpretation of the extraordinary events, portraying the changed master not quite as a threatening predator, but as an unfortunate victim plainly seized with one of those maladies that both torture and deform the sufferer, a poor soul. So the student shows awareness again of subtle, nuanced reading because she goes beyond the obvious reading of Hyde just as this beast or monster, right? Rat-like or otherwise, it doesn't matter. But she points out that he's not quite just beastly, but also there's room for us to engage with him and to look at him with a layer of empathy, right? Which is what Utterson indeed is doing here, okay? So the student goes on to then kind of latch onto a key word in the quotation she's just brought on. So the pathological connotation of maladies casts Hyde in the light of a patient plagued by disease. So indeed, someone who is worthy of sympathy, and suggests a broader skepticism that Stevenson may have felt towards popular pseudo-scientific practices like mesmerism, which is a concept that sought to elevate human capacity to supernatural levels by conjuring up trance-like experiences, often to detrimental effects. So clearly bringing in contextual framework here, he's trying to address the AO3 objective. The twin preoccupation of science and morality in Victorian England meant that some psychiatric schools sought to effect moral transformation through chemical and bodily experimentations, an example of which is chronicled in the British physician James Cowles Pritchard's 1835 Treatise on Insanity and Others, which some scholars remark contain a case study that is similar to Jekyll's, making Pritchard's work a likely source which could have inspired Stevenson's fantastical tale. So all of this is the student showing that she's able to frame her analysis of Hyde's kind of patient-like characterization with specific contextual ideas, right? And specifically, it's about Victorian cultural and science, or rather perhaps, in retrospect, it would seem like pseudoscience theories more like, right? So in any case, far from achieving the purported goal of subliminal or moral transcendence, these dubious pseudo-scientific trials would more often than not fail, sometimes even resulting in lifelong deformities and deaths for the clinical subject, which is very much also the case that's demonstrated here in Stevenson's novel, right? So it seems then that through Utterson's appeal to God that he grant the poor soul some hope of ultimate recovery, Stevenson is expressing a hint of sympathy towards Hyde's inhumanity as a product of the Victorian man's disastrous scientific ambition and moral repressions. So the student is able to again link the context back to her textual analysis with relevance and insight, right? Matching the AO3 together with AO1 masterfully. Okay? So next paragraph, the student moves on to look at the novel as a whole, right? Having engaged with the extract to such a detailed level. Indeed, there's a persistent sense throughout the novel that Hyde does not fit into a neat ontological category. So use of the word ontological here, AO4, sophisticated use of vocabulary, but more importantly, the student is adding a philosophical angle to her interpretation because the word ontology means of the nature of being, right? So ontological would be relating to one's existence, right? One's nature of being, what kind of existential category are you, right? We're humans, a dog is an animal, right? So these are like the different ontological categories. So he neither comes across human-like, Hyde, neither comes across human-like or entirely beast-like, but more as a conceptual projection or an abstract embodiment of notions such as evil, depravity, and fallenness. So the student builds upon her initial thesis, right? The initial thesis is that Hyde seems more kind of beastly, right, than human, inhuman. But now the student is actually saying, let's consider inhuman, not just in terms of animal, right, but also in terms of something that goes beyond just these two existential categories. a concept, an abstract notion, right? Something a lot more kind of vague, but also philosophical. Essentially, there is something gravely wrong with Hyde's appearance, but no one can quite put a finger on exactly what it is that makes him so shudderingly repulsive, right? Because had he been a full animal or beast, at least we'd be able to explain it or describe it to a more explicit degree. This is suggested, for instance, in Stevenson's recurrent attribution of the word deformed, or its variants, to Hyde, amounting to 7 times across the text, such as when Enfield comments that Hyde must be deformed somewhere, Utterson's silent observation of Hyde giving an impression of deformity without any nameable malformation, Jekyll's own confession of seeing evil having left on that body an imprint of deformity and decay, etc. Right? So student notice that sources, examples from across the entire span of the text, right? All the way from chapter 1 to chapter 10, right? So making sure, and this is a general rule of thumb, you're going to make sure that whenever you're sourcing examples and evidence from the text, you are bringing in the examples and quotations that cover the entire span of the text, right? Beginning, middle, and the ending, as opposed to just kind of focusing or narrowing to just one part of the text, because, you know, that kind of suggests you're not really quite thoroughly familiar with the text, and that's going to hurt your impression marks. So this pronounced emphasis on Hyde's deformity paints the character as a freakish chimera reminiscent of Frankenstein's monster, a figure that Stevenson would have perhaps been inspired by, with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein having been published just 70 years prior to that of his own text. So again, showing literary contextual awareness, right? And drawing this beautiful intertextual association of two sentient beings that are obviously quite similar to one another. Yeah? So, penultimate paragraph, another instance where Hyde's inhuman essence is borne out is in the other character's linguistic ambiguity when describing Hyde. So notice here that the student isn't just bringing in textual evidence from elsewhere in the novel in terms of the incidents or the plot, right? She's also engaging with the style and language of these other examples from the other parts of the novel. So, for example, in chapter 2, Mr. Enfield refers to Hyde as not easy to describe, but there's something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable, right? So this something brings us probably back to this idea of the sort of ineffability of Hyde's ugliness. It's just something about him that we can't quite explain, right? We can't quite pin down. While something implies an inexplicable vagueness about Hyde's repelling aura, that the word is thrice reiterated reinforces the visceral aversion that Hyde evokes in others, right? This visceral aversion means this instinctual sense of ugh, right? Like just looking at Hyde and immediately feeling repulsed, right? But there's not quite a rational feeling or reason for it. Or at least not immediately. It doesn't really come to mind. But well, the characters just know that when they set eyes on Hyde, they just feel all kinds wrong. Indeed, this ambiguous but instinctual dislike towards Hyde's extraordinary looking form is likewise reflected in Enfield's following remark. He must be deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, although I couldn't specify the point. Towards the end of the chapter in which Hyde's brutal murder of Danvers Carew is related, the word deformity aptly reappears when Utterson, the inspector, and Carew's maid agreed that there was a haunting sense of unexpressed deformity with which the fugitive impressed his beholders. The fugitive here obviously referring to Hyde. So there's a combination of Hyde's natural repulsiveness and the attendant emotional disturbance created is encapsulated here, right? Natural repulsiveness and emotional disturbance, drawing back to what the question is asking us about, right? Inhuman and disturbing member of society. But while Hyde's deformity may be manifested as physical and anatomical ugliness, it symbolizes the moral rottenness at the core of the outwardly respectable Victorian gentleman, which is of course his public doppelganger, Dr. Jekyll, which is of course not Hyde per se, but Jekyll, his creator. So this is actually more of an organic conclusion. Notice that there isn't this usual kind of in conclusion, and to summarize, it doesn't have to be so stilted, right? But there's a more kind of organic conclusion that circles back to what is one of the key themes in the novel, right? And this is this moral hypocrisy of the seemingly perfect Victorian gentleman who actually leads this clandestine, secretive, low life, right? Which actually serves as a necessary kind of outlet for all of his suppressed desires, at the expense of having to put on this, kind of polished, perfect facade. Okay? Awesome. So that's that for this video, guys. I hope that it was helpful in terms of demonstrating for you what a top grade Jekyll and Hyde essay would look like, especially when it comes to looking at Hyde's characterization. As usual, if you found this helpful, please do hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my weekly study videos. I will definitely be putting out more top grade sample essay walkthroughs down the line. And if you haven't already, please also check out my Jekyll and Hyde sample essay pack, which will give you all of the top grade essays that I will be posting and more, as well as the detailed annotations that you'll be getting according to the official assessment objectives. Okay, so thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!